Hi, this is Corey Johnston, and in today's lessons, we're going to be discussing the differences between Judaism and Christianity. Now, it can easily be argued that they share more in common than they hold apart. They are our spiritual forebears, and our religion is somewhat inherited from them. But in order to build the foundation upon which we can establish the differences, we have to open with an acknowledgement of what sets them apart from every other religion, and that is they are the unique recipients of what is known as special revelation. Revelation is a reference to any item of information which is revealed from a divine source, and this the Buddha, for example, he neither denied nor affirmed the existence of a deity. He claimed that all of his insights were born of independent inquiry, and the divinity of Muhammad's revelations are dubious at best. You can type in Corey Johnston, Islam and Christianity for more on that. But special revelation, general revelation is natural. In other words, the created order bears witness to the creator, and conscience, which functions in a similar capacity as the law, which is a species of special revelation, of which we'll soon touch upon, and that it convicts the conscience when they know what they're doing is wrong. And special revelation refers to visions, dreams, prophecies, the law, and finally the most supreme form of revelation of all, the incarnate Son, whom the Jews refused to recognize, or most of them did. But we're going to begin with the law of Moses, and the central feature of it is very much contained in the Ten Commandments. Now, to be clear, the law is more extensive than these 10 commandments alone. There are a total of 613 precepts in the Mosaic law, but most of them are derived somewhat from these 10. We're actually only be discussing the first 4, which are the sacred commandments, which are to govern our relation to divinity, whereas the final 6 are righteous commandments, which govern our relation to our neighbors. And most of the righteous laws are self-evident apart from special revelation. For obvious reasons, you can't have a society that allows people to lie, kill, commit adultery, disrespect their parents, etc., because the entire social fabric is torn asunder. But as far as I know, the Hebrews were distinct in legislating an attitude, the covetousness. But we're going to focus on the first 4, which is what really set them apart. So we're going to be reading from the Deuteronomy account. It can be found in the 5th chapter of Deuteronomy and the 20th chapter of Exodus. We've relied on the Exodus version, and as far as I know, we've never used the Deuteronomy version, and they contain greater similarity of contents than they do differences. But if you're so inclined, you can copy and paste from the computer Deuteronomy 7:15 and Exodus 3:11 to compare the similarities and differences. And we're not going to try to elaborate on the meaning and function of law. We're going to concentrate our emphasis on the respective approaches to each of these laws. So the 7th verse reads, "You have no other mighty ones against my face." This is a declaration for monotheism, whereby which Elohim was to be supremely exalted and uncompromised devotion, and the Jews were militantly monotheistic, not so much as the Muslims, who were literally militant, but more so than the Christians. For example, they have no concept of the Trinity, which is the 3 manifestations of Elohim, Yahweh the Father, Yeshua the Son, and the Ruach Kadesh. They referenced the Ruach Kadesh, but they conceived it as an extension of Yahweh rather than an independent, distinct divine entity, the doctrine of which would not emerge until the writing of the New Testament. So the incarnation was a stumbling block, and they refused to accept his claims for divinity, and ultimately tried and charged him for blasphemy on those grounds. "You do not make for yourself a carved image, any likeness of which is in the heavens above, or which is in the earth beneath, or which is in the waters under earth. Now, the entire premise of Old Testament injunctions against idolatry were rooted in Yahweh's invisible nature and essence, according to which he could not be accurately portrayed or likened to anything in physical creation. Now, in most Christian churches, you will find crosses, and that's somewhat of a gray area on account of the fact that the Son did in fact inhabit mortal frame and physical material matter. So there's arguments against and for the utilization of crosses. Some people view it as idolatry. Others are comfortable, relaxed. We're not going to get into that debate. We're just going to present the fact of its existence. You do not bow down to them, nor serve them. For I, Yahweh, your Elohim, am a jealous El, visiting the wickedness of the fathers upon the children to the third and fourth generation of those who hate me. Now, the Amish, they isolate the 8th and ninth verse, whereby any aesthetic art is inherently forbidden, but aesthetic art is not sinful. It's only sinful if one bows down to it. But showing kindness to thousands of those who love me and keep my commands. You do not bring the name of Yahweh your Elohim to naught, for Yahweh does not leave him unpunished who brings his name to naught. So this is the sin of blasphemy, which is bringing the name, speaking of it in vulgar or casual or irreverent terms, but more broadly speaking, anything that brings the name of Yahweh into disrepute or disregard is blasphemous. And of course, we mentioned earlier that Yahshua, in elevating himself to an equal station to Yahweh, condemned him ultimately. That served as their decisive pretext. They were forever trying to bait him into some reproachful utterance against their own or Roman law, according to which they could have their pretext to execute him. And during his trial, he essentially claimed, he said that the Son of Man will come down, and that ultimately sealed his fate, but it was ultimately aligned with the divine purpose. And keep the Sabbath day to sanctify it, as Yahweh your Elohim commanded you. 6 days you labor, and shall do all your work. But the seventh is a Sabbath of Yahweh your Elohim. You do not do any work. You, your son, nor your daughter, nor your male servant, nor your female servant, nor your ass, nor your donkey, nor any of your cattle, nor your strangers who is within your gates, so that your male servant and your female servant rest as you do. And you shall remember that you were a slave in the land of Egypt, and that Yahweh your Elohim brought you out from there by a strong hand and by an outstretched arm. Therefore Yahweh your Elohim commanded you to perform the Sabbath day. Now, as a practicing Jew, Yahshua was very much in the practice of attending synagogue and participating in the Sabbath ceremonies. Of course, he did some activities which were forbidden according to additional Pharisaical injunction, who took it upon their own initiative to add at least 39 laws. Other rumors is that they had books this big pertaining on what one could and could not do on the Sabbath, but this was not authorized or inspired. It was on their own initiative, and some of his healing activities contradicted their interpretation thereof. But the most significant difference in Jewish and Christian observance of the Sabbath is not the details. We both refrain from worldly items or concern, and this is a day of rest, worship, and fellowship. But the day of the Sabbath is considered by the Jews to be Saturday. This is originated in creation when Yahweh rested on the seventh. The majority of Christians celebrated on Sunday. The most significant exception is the Seventh-day Adventist, But the origin of the Sunday Sabbath can be traced to heretics affiliated with the Emperor Constantine, who remained a devoted worshiper of the Persian sun deity Mithras even after his Christian conversion. Later generations of Christians would reconcile this discrepancy by equating it with the Sabbath tomb. With the resurrection, the day that he was resurrected was on Sunday, but it can also be argued that he rested on Saturday. But we discussed this more detailed. I did Corey Johnston, The Meaning of the Sabbath in the Old Testament, and the similar title for the New Testament, if you're curious on more extensive details. Now, when the Messiah came, he incurred the reputation as holding the law in scant regard, and he did not. He very much honored it as an expression of his Father. The law is very much an expression of his will, and the Messiah deflated its significance to secondary importance while elevating the demands to a more exalted station. So we read in Matthew 5:17, "Do not think that I came to destroy the Torah or the prophets. I did not come to destroy, but to fulfill." Now, this poses questions such as, are Christians morally bound by the Mosaic Law? And the answer is yes and no. In order to understand that, we must understand the three components, the three general categories of the Mosaic Law, which were civil, moral, and ceremonial. So the civil law, because the secular society is so radically at variance with most cultures, some of the laws are applicable to us, but every one of them is worthy of complication for an expression of the will of the Father. And the moral law remains binding. That is, roughly speaking, the Ten Commandments, more broadly the 613 injunctions, and the civil and ceremonial law was eternally eradicated on the cross, hence rendering it no longer necessary. And the 18th verse reads, "For truly I say to you, till the heavens and the earth pass away, one yod or one tittle shall by no means pass from the Torah till all be done." So he's claiming an unalterable permanence of the law, which so much so that even the jot or the tittle, which we may associate with the dots on top of the letter J in I, lowercase I, for instance. So everything is preserved intact and is eternally binding and is an expression of the Father's will, one which the Son honored in perfect compliance. "Whoever then breaks one of these commands and teaches men so shall be called the least in the kingdom of the heavens. But whoever does and teaches them, he shall be called great in the kingdom of the heavens." So they are now this lays the foundation for the remainder of the chapter, whereby he elevates and exalts these standards which are to be observed and obeyed in accordance to the law, which he displaces actions with attitudes. In other words, lusting is the moral equivalent of adultery, as is rage or wrath with murder. And then Galatians 3:24, this is Paul writing. "Therefore the Torah became our trainer unto Messiah, in order to be justified by faith." So he likens it in other translations to a schoolmaster or one. So the law was an inferior form of revelation which could not justify one. It could only expose their sin and their need for a savior. And the law functioned essentially as a mirror, but one does not clean themselves by the mirror, but by the atoning blood, which has a, spiritually speaking, hygienic quality. And the next verse we're going to read is 2:16 from the same book. "Knowing that a man is not justified by works of Torah, but through faith in Yahshua the Messiah, even we have believed in Messiah Yahshua, in order to be justified by faith in Messiah, and not by works of Torah, because by works of Torah no flesh shall be declared right." or justified. And to paraphrase Martin Luther, it is the height of arrogance to assume that our works can in any way equal the pleasure with which Yahweh took in his son's crucifixion. And that, the principle as embedded in this verse is that justification, the law cannot justify, it can only convict and condemn, but it can point us, it serves as the functional equivalent of a schoolmaster to lead us and point us to the Messiah. And we're actually going to close up today. We originally outlined more extensive discourse, but we're going to treat it in separate for the sake of economy of time. And the subsequent discourse will be the Jewish prophecies relating to the Messiah. So stay tuned for that, and thank you so much for being here. Stay tuned till next time. Bye-bye. Thank you.